All right. Uh, I'm Catherine Mazzone here on behalf of Mojo Streaming, and I'm thrilled to introduce a guest we've been dying to have on. Her name is Lauren Arthur, and she's a conservation storyteller. I was just telling her how much I adore that title and would love to have a job like that. So I just want to start off really by asking you what a conservation storyteller is.
Oh, hi there. Thank you so much for having me
Yes.
on. It's actually becoming quite a common term now, conservation storyteller. So I guess it's quite broad in what it actually is. My career is really diverse, coming from a quite heavily scientific background where I really thought I would go into science, and I gravitated a little bit more away from that. And I ended up in production, where I was in front of the camera telling stories. And that's great. That's fantastic. Stories are what people relate to. They're that emotional connection between a fact and how you are going to make people feel about that fact. And they really I really believe that especially visual storytelling, because we are all visual beings, at least our species, is really the way forward to fuel change for our planet. So from being in front of the camera on Wild Earth TV and telling stories, I also realized I could use my skills as a storyteller to encourage others to tell their stories, Indigenous stories, and people that have possibly lived with animals or all their lives or worked with animals. And I realized that I don't have to be the voice telling the story to be a storyteller. So when I say conservation storyteller, that will involve people and culture and wildlife and landscapes and bring it all together to tell a story. And I can be the one behind the camera assisting those people, listening, interacting, engaging. And that's sort of my definition of being a conservation storyteller.
Awesome. So, how important is it for you to find stories that haven't been told yet or unique perspectives? You were talking about culture. How significant is that in your career right now?
It's so significant. And I think wildlife filmmaking and storytelling is becoming so cool and fashionable, and everyone wants to do it, of course, because it's amazing. So I think you've really got to have that deep understanding to find those stories that haven't been told before, or as you say, find a unique perspective. What's the perspective that's missing? For example, maybe the story of the river has been told 100 times, but has the story of the fish in that river been told? So it's just looking at things from a different perspective to give us more understanding about our world. And I think my position in Africa right now has really opened my eyes to all the incredible stories that are out there that should be shared with the world.
So, I want to get a little background on you. Where are you from originally, Lauren?
I'm from Scotland, which is absolutely miles away from anything that I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
And I've been traveling for a really, really long time. So I didn't really expect to end up in Africa or South Africa. But I'm here and I love it. And I couldn't honestly imagine being anywhere else.
Tell me what you would do in a normal day as a conservation storyteller.
Well, it's actually all very new for us. So I was working for Wild Earth TV until recently, and I'm not sure if you know what it is, but it's a live TV show where you drive around and it's completely live. You take people on a live safari drive and just see what you can find. Sometimes you'll find everything, sometimes you will find absolutely nothing. And that's really when you learn to tell stories.
Yep.
But we have left Wild Earth TV for now, and my partner and I are sort of pursuing the conservation storytelling avenue. So we're at the stage where we're working with a lot of different organizations. Some I can talk with, some I can't. I can't right now. Who all have a story to tell. So even these ecologies, even these people that have started a business long ago in a wildlife space or in a sort of indigenous community actually start to work together with the communities or for the wildlife. And they also have their own story to tell. So one of probably the most famous and iconic organization that we're working with right now is WWF International. And we are telling sort of conservation stories for them. Our first story that we released was on the Ethiopian wolf. So are, not many people know that Ethiopia even has a wolf, and definitely people don't know that there's only 500 remaining.
Incredible.
It's Africa's most endangered carnivore, and they are the most beautiful, majestic, gorgeous little things, and they're really, really battling against extinction. So just to be able to go to Ethiopia and tell that story and meet people to help tell that story was really incredible. So every day is different, and it's very much a new venture for us right now.
I'm really curious what it's like to work with people who might never have interacted with a big camera before, and then you're like, oh hey, I want to ask you some questions, or how does that work?
Well, to be honest, our camera is very, very small.
Okay, you have a small one. I saw a big one in one of those pictures.
Well, luckily this one's quite small, so it's not
Good.
too intrusive. Cameras are getting smaller and smaller these days. But you have to go in with the right approach. Camera doesn't come out until much later. Go in there and really spend time with people. We spent a lot of time in Ethiopia with guides who have worked with the wolves all their life. They can identify these wolves. They can tell you the history of these wolves, which pack it belongs to, its behavior, its history, and that is amazing. Get to know these people, listen to their story, and again, interact and engage. And only then start to explain that you would really like to film them so that the whole world can listen to these stories and see them. And it takes a while before you bring that camera out. I would never go into any area in any country with the camera out. Integrate first. And of course, you've always got to do everything very respectfully and just make sure that people do want to be on camera. And then if they do, it always helps to, since I have been on camera myself, it always helps me to sort of show how it's done. It's not easy when someone puts a camera in your face. It's actually quite nerve-wracking. I still get nervous. So I think it helps when people realize that you're also nervous, and to slowly just start to forget the camera's there and make it as authentic as possible.
Yeah, that's so cool. You mentioned your work with WWF and the amazing piece you did about the wolves in Ethiopia. I know that you're originally a marine biologist,
Yes.
and you've been on this journey, but you're kind of circling back around with the celebration of Ocean's Day coming up in June. Can we get a little information about a little sneak peek kind of thing about what that's going to be like?
Sure. So the WWF is obviously a huge organization, and they appointed 10 voices around the globe. And my partner and I were selected to be one voice together, which is really incredible. It was quite a momentous moment to tell stories. And naturally, we did Ethiopia. And then we thought, what can we really do next that we know we're good at, that we know we can tell that story? And my background, I actually worked in the Maldives for over 7 years. And that country is almost part of me. I will forever see that as my sort of second home. And I thought, let's go back to the Maldives and tell the story. A lot of people think the Maldives is this little island nation, which it is. They're going to sink with climate change, which we don't know. And you lie on the beach, drink cocktails, which you can. But there is so much more to that country, from the amazing people, the culture, and the marine life. They don't have too many terrestrial animals naturally, but the marine life is absolutely phenomenal. So on World Ocean Day, which is the 8th of June, we're actually going to release our second series, and it's 3 different episodes. First episode is on the sharks of Maldives. Wow. Second episode is on manta rays, sharks' closest relative. And then the third episode is actually on seagrass. And all 3 of those topics are so tightly interconnected and intertwined, but I'll wait until you see the series to find out exactly how.
Yeah, you really have my mind thinking when you mentioned seagrass. How can that be interesting? But I have a feeling there's some significance to it that I don't know about yet.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I am very well traveled and very blessed to be so. And I think swimming in the seagrass beds for the first time was one of the most exciting things I've ever done. I did not expect it to be as incredible as it really is. It's a completely misunderstood and underappreciated habitat. And it is phenomenal when you actually get to swim in those meadows and film what's in the meadows. And yeah, it has a really tight relationship to sharks.
Yeah, very cool. I'm also interested in how you mentioned kind of the evolution of storytelling and how, the cameras are getting smaller and everybody's doing it. So what do you foresee happening in the conservation storytelling arena as it evolves? Where do you see this going next as far as you're concerned?
Well, I think, for a long time, the BBC, for example, dominated the sort of, they probably still do, but the wildlife space. And they are incredible, and what they produce is incredible, and it's so perfect. I personally prefer more authentic productions, where maybe it's just the guy with a handheld camera, and maybe the camera shakes a little bit, but that's okay because you're walking up a mountain. And maybe that shot of the animal is not 100% perfect because it jumped out a tree, or I think that's Wild Earth that brought that out in me. So I think visual storytelling, conservation storytelling is becoming more and more authentic in that realm. Anyone can pick up a camera. I mean, everyone has a phone. Yeah. And although that's not high quality, I mean, anyone really can film anything. And I think the fact that stories are growing and the popularity of stories is growing, that can only be a good thing. There are so many stories to tell, and you can come at them from different angles. So yes, there's a shark. So someone might want to talk about how scary sharks are, which they're not at all. Or someone might want to talk about the shark's role in the ecosystem, or someone might want to talk about how sharks hunt. And, there's so many different avenues to one subject. And I think with all the creative individuals around the world, it's unique to see how different people tell different stories. So I think the space is going to continue to expand and expand and expand. And I really do believe there is room for everyone to tell stories. And you have to have that creative ability to see the story and know exactly how you want to tell it. So I think it's only going to get better.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that, and I think of citizen journalism just automatically because everyone can pick up a camera, like you said, but there's also responsibility in your storytelling. So if someone does want to get involved, can you kind of explain what the responsibility behind conservation storytelling might be?
Absolutely. I think it really depends on what story you are telling, but what you have to remember, especially with Indigenous storytelling, which is so powerful these days. I actually saw a quote the other day that said, Indigenous storytelling is science.
Wow.
And it is. And when you are sort of going down that route, I think it's really important to remember that it's not your story. You are just the person weaving that story and allowing that story to happen, helping it to happen in a sort of producer capacity, but it's not your story. And I think anyone that wants to sort of get started in that space, especially Indigenous storytelling, must be aware that it's not your story and have the right team around you. When going into different communities, it's really important that I think maybe back in the day, I read a really interesting report on National Geographic that said a lot of communities are still reeling from mistakes that have been made in the past. And we also have to understand that mistakes have been made, mistakes will always be made. And it's just important to go forward in that space, knowing that that's the story you want to tell, but you really, really have to understand that it's not your story. You can't put your mark on that story verbally. Of course, visually, we're the ones putting it together. Sure. And I think it's just really important to do your research and background check and just know that, just go in with the knowledge that mistakes will have been made in the past.
That's good advice.
By other foreigners. And you just have to take that sort of on the chin and just realize that going into a community, just be aware of that. I think that was a really crucial piece of advice, actually, when I read that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure, but I would think that it could be discouraging when you come into a place and you try to make your case or you try to have a conversation and they brush you off because of what somebody else did. And you're like, no, but that wasn't me. that wasn't me. I'm different. I mean,
Exactly.
yeah, how do you deal with that? How do you push past these first impressions?
I mean, luckily, I've never sort of encountered that to date.
Yeah.
I've just done a lot of research for different projects that we are working on. I'm a scientist, so I love to sit and research. I need to know the ins and out of the story. And it was just during that research phase recently that I thought, aha, there is a way to tell a story properly. I mean, if you're just filming the lions of the Mara, then I'm sure the lions are not going to be too bothered about your presence. But when you involve people, anyone from all around the world, you just have to remember that, you know, that mistakes have been made. And I luckily haven't encountered it. I mean, I worked in the Maldives for, again, 7+ years. So I'm very integrated there. So I didn't have to consider that. But on various projects that we are working on right now, we do have to consider that. And it's just been quite a learning curve for me.
It's interesting that there are not a whole lot of people that I've encountered who do, well, I can think of one now that I said that, who do both humanity and wildlife. It's usually, oh, I'm focused on wildlife conservation, or
Yeah.
I'm focused on telling the story of humans and culture. I'm curious, how did you get involved with both?
It's so simple. They can't exist without each other.
Mm.
So another reason, and I feel like I'm dissing the BBC here, I'm not at all, the productions are
No.
incredible, but the reason I sometimes feel disconnected from the productions is because they don't show the human element. I mean, recently they are now. I think they're doing Our Changing Planet. But, you know, to see these wild species that are so pristine and there's no visible sign of any human presence, that's not real. If you try and think in your mind, there is absolutely nowhere on our planet where humans haven't touched. I mean, we've even been to the moon, apparently. So when you are filming, obviously you want that pristine shot of the lion walking through the grass, but there could be a hut there where the ranger stays or the anti-poaching unit stays or even a community. And that's always cropped out of the frame. And I think it was my work through Wild Earth, because everything was always live. We never had the choice. If we walk into the anti-poaching unit, they're there. Hi, we see you. We can't crop you out or edit you out or pretend you're not there, because you are there and you're very much part of that unit. I mean, you protect our rhinos. But I mean, that's maybe a silly example. There's electricity pylons. There is even just carvings and some rocks in the Kalahari. There is human presence everywhere. We go to the North Pole, we go to the South Pole, we climb every mountain, we go into the jungle. So I realized that you can actually crop humans out of the story now. We're not separate. So when you are telling a wildlife story, very often, I mean, not always, but very often there is a human story linked in there as well. And I think it's important that you have to be able to tell both. We're very much part of the story.
What are the kind of stories that where humans would be involved with wildlife? These behind the scenes things that you've seen live, I guess, on Wild Earth.
Oh, I mean, live, we've seen so many things live, not necessarily negative, but just living in that space in the Sabi Sands. I mean, it is still classified as a wild space. It borders the Kruger, and human wildlife conflict there is a big problem. And I hate to say this right now because I just saw some bad news on my phone about 10 minutes before this podcast, but prior to that bad news, maybe just a little under a year ago, one of our favorite leopards that we followed, and he was a magnificent creature that I absolutely adored and spent so much time with, was actually shot. And he had wandered out of the reserve, and I was actually the last person to see him, and I saw him walking out of the reserve, and I remember thinking, oh boy, come back, you know, you're going in the wrong direction. And he ended up in a village, in a sort of local community that neighbors the Sabi Sands, and he was hungry, so he started attacking this woman's goats. Now she saw him, she can see him hiding, she can hear the murders, and he was comfortable. He's a very relaxed leopard actually, and he ended up sort of just living in her garden. Now she has children, and the goats are also her entire livelihood. So the management of the area came out and he was eventually shot. That was the management's decision. But there was an outcry, and a lot of people reacted very negatively. And I am sometimes call them the armchair critics, you know, those people that have never been into the field and don't really understand the situation, but have an opinion. And it was a very negative situation because a leopard was killed. Not only was he a leopard, he was a well-known leopard. He was a bit of a celebrity, and I'm not joking.
Yeah, I believe it.
But what you've got to realize is human wildlife conflict is across the board, especially in Africa. I would say Africa of all the, maybe South America, but Africa of all the continents, it's a huge problem, not just in South Africa, but all the way up. And it's so much more common than you think. And I think that by that situation coming out, by it coming to light, I spoke about it live, was a good thing. You've got to make people aware that as the human race is expanding and populations are just expanding across the globe, we're not getting any smaller, that we are making those wildlife species smaller and smaller and smaller. And the closer people live to these wildlife species, especially indigenous communities, there is going to be conflict. And instead of being in an uproar, like, oh, why was that leopard shot? It's devastating that leopard was shot. I loved him dearly, but it highlights an issue here. And it highlights something that needs to be spoken about, and it needs to be realistically spoken about, not on emotion. I'm a very emotional person. I cried for days when I found that out, but the realistic part of me knows that it's an issue and it has to be looked at by all the sort of parks boards and all the different management programs that are there. And it's not just a problem here. And I think it's just not spoken enough. And I read a fantastic book lately by a South African author called Adam Cruz. And the book is called It's Not About the Bats. And it starts off very much about COVID, the pandemic, our relationship with nature, what went wrong there, how it really wasn't about the bats. We wanted to blame the bats, but bats are actually fantastic. And it's not about the bats. Yes, they do carry the COVID strain, but it's not about that. And it's a fantastic book that talks about trophy hunting. It talks about canned hunting. It talks about all the issues in South Africa, especially human wildlife conflict. And that book was a real turning point in my thinking. And I think everyone needs to read that book. It's so honest and it just puts things on a different perspective. And I think to wrap this long story up, you need to be able to look at a situation and see all different perspectives. There's a lot of people that just react. We're very reactive. And we need to stop that. We think, okay, I'm very sad about what's happened, but why is this happening? And look at all the different sides of the coin. That was that woman's entire livelihood. Mm-hmm. She had children. There was a reason that that decision was made. And yeah, just going back to your original question, as one of the main things I saw, I experienced, there's another piece of news that's happened, something again is very similar to that has happened in that area in South Africa. And I think just needs to be spoken instead of sort of covered up, you know, oh, that animal's dead, let's hide. It needs to be more sort of made public, if you like.
Yeah. So there's an opportunity for more storytelling about, like you said, the human and animal interaction. There's room for growth there.
Yeah, there is. And it's not a good situation, but we're expanding. I mean, even in Ethiopia, they're having huge problems right now with overpopulation, and there just is no space. It's the second most populous country in Africa, and it's just expanding at an unsustainable rate. So people are then moving into the mountains, they're moving into rural areas where they can farm, they can still have their protein. And when there's no space at the bottom of the mountain, they're then starting to climb up the mountain, and then they're taking away habitat for all these other animals, including the wolf. And that's one of the main problems in Ethiopia right now. Humans are taking over wild species. I really don't believe that humans should sort of go into a wildlife space to interact. And I think a lot of people forget that. And I think there's something they call the Sapi-Sans complacency syndrome, where the animals are very habituated in that wild space that you start to think, I know this animal. Like, you become very relaxed and you become complacent. So in my job, I always had to slap myself, don't become complacent, don't. And if I see myself doing it, I would really try and shake it out, because it's not a healthy mindset. So interact, no, but there's so many positive reasons for being able to visit a wild space where there is wildlife, and just observe them in their natural habitat. That sort of feeling of being next to a wild animal and just watching it go about its daily life, and know that on some level in that wildlife space it might be protected. It's just the most incredible thing in the world. And I think it connects us to nature. And that's been a big problem with the world lately. We're very disconnected from it, you know, us and them, and we're not, we're very much part of it. We've just forgotten that. And I think there are so many reasons that visiting a wildlife space is amazing, but interacting, no, I would definitely not be a poster girl for that in any way, shape, or form. And there obviously are many examples of feeding and riding and handling I'm not for. But yeah, I think everyone at some point should just get out of their comfort zone and get out of their home and go to a wild space, even if it is just a mountain and all you see is a rabbit. That's okay. That's a wild animal.
It's true though. I mean, I see that I actually have a groundhog that lives across the creek from me. And every time I see that guy, I'm getting out my phone and getting video, because it's just fun, right?
It is fun. And the more you watch and observe, the more you learn. I mean, I was never the biggest insect fan, I must say, but I became obsessed with them. There's an airplane going overhead. I really got into the world of insects through the help of some books, and through also just living in an area where the insect life just flourishes with the rains. And I became really obsessed with insects. I love their little colorful, diverse, crazy world. They've got their own little soap operas going on, their own little lives. And I think, you know, the more time you spend out there, the more interesting things you find to look at and things you want to learn about. And yeah, insects was that for me.
Very cool. What else haven't I asked you, Lauren, that you think would be interesting for our viewers? I know there's a ton, but.
Oh goodness, I've spoken a lot about some crazy topics, and I think just to round up, anyone can spend time in nature. You don't have to be a biologist or a scientist or a storyteller or a TV presenter. You know, it all looks very cool on Instagram and Facebook, but actually forget about that. You know, forget about what looks cool and what other people are doing. It's really detrimental to mental health right now. Just really get out there, go somewhere in your own country, even if it is just the farm or the local mountain or the woodland or the river, wherever you are in the world, and just really just go and see what's out there and start to just understand your own habitat and how you fit into it. And I really think that's life-changing for some people. It's very healing, and I think the world needs to heal.
Sounds like that could be the next step forward, is encouraging more folks to get outside and commune with nature, almost just get back to wildlife and the outdoors,
back to basics. And you know, I still see people throw trash, and I just think I want to just, sometimes I've gone up to people and said, hey, that's not a good thing to do, but I can't believe some people still throw trash and things out the windows. And I think the more people that reconnect with nature and the environment, they will make better decisions.
Agreed.
Or you hope they will. So yeah, that would just be my little piece of advice for everyone.
You can only hope, right? Lauren, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. We definitely will be in touch, and keep us posted about that June 8th series, because I know a lot of people are looking forward to it, including myself.
Absolutely. You will be able to see it on WWF's YouTube. So you just need to follow them on Instagram and you'll get all the information.
Awesome. We'll provide that link for folks, Lauren.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, yes. Thank you again. And I hope to talk to you again.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, been a pleasure. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.